This episode is sponsored by the Live Alcohol Experiment, a 30-day science-based and compassion-led journey where you learn to develop a healthier relationship with alcohol without relying on willpower. Why? Because the truth is that willpower runs out. Instead, you learn how to focus on what you gain, not what you give up, so you can feel good about the decisions you make without shame or guilt. With the 30 days of video training, virtual daily coaching, and a private and supportive community, you get that and so much more. Join us today to get happier, healthier, and to take back your life. Your Live Alcohol Experiment starts on the 1st, so sign up at livealcoholexperiment.com. Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. And I'm here with Maggie. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Annie.
Oh, it's so good to have you on.
It's great to be here.
So why don't you sort of take us back to the beginning for you with alcohol? Where did it all start?
Yeah, thank you. Well, so the beginning, when I was a teenager and a young adult, I really didn't drink very much. I had, the odd beer in high school kind of thing, illicit thing here and there at a party, but I just found it sort of disgusting. I had grown up in pretty much alcohol-free home, so I really wasn't used to it. I wasn't, it wasn't a thing for me. I did not like being around drunk people. And for myself, I found I didn't like the feeling of slurring or getting wobbly. So throughout my 20s, throughout my early 20s, I was pretty much teetotal. I really only got used to drinking in my late 20s after my daughter was born. I was living in London at the time. And obviously the drinking culture there is like a pretty massive thing. It was just everywhere. And suddenly it was fun. It was like the way that people would connect and socialize. In fact, I was working at a magazine company at the time, and it had a very drinky culture, which is not unusual for British companies, especially, I suppose, in media. But, everybody would all kind of go to the pub after work pretty much every day, and certainly every Friday. And get this, once a month, the company would host what they called their company lunch, which was supposed to be like our big meeting where the owners would share all the news about the company. So at this company lunch, there was no food served, but there was free wine and beer.
Wow.
Which was just everybody loved it. It was very popular. So I got into that. And by, a few years later, I was drinking normally by British standards, which is, to say that I was drinking, I think, quite a lot. And then as I moved through my 30s, I was really pretty much drinking wine almost every night, which again was just considered normal. All my friends drank wine every night. Nobody thought it was a problem. And at that time, I was back in Canada, where I'm from, in Vancouver, and I had a lot of stress in my job. I was working at a daily newspaper. And what I noticed was that just some nights I would just hit the wine really hard. I did notice that even though everybody was normalizing it, I was the one who tended to be thirstier than everyone else. I would drink faster and more often. And sometimes I would have been ready for bed by 8 p.m., but that doesn't necessarily mean I stopped and went to bed. I developed that thing of not having an off switch.
Yeah.
So then came hangovers, of course. And what I hated most about that was just feeling impaired in my brain, my mental acuity, just losing all my sharpness and my productivity. I would still show up to work, but it was just really hard to think clearly or be productive. And my emotions were all over the place. So I was just, more anxious, more fragile, more reactive to everything. And I think at that time, during my sort of late 30s, I was probably hungover 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Which, looking back, I'm I do not know how I functioned and
did
all the things.
Normal to feel like crap.
Yeah, it's just I can do this, and it was just just became just part of my way of being. And then I noticed that on the rare nights when I didn't drink at all, and they were honestly pretty rare, I would just feel really restless. What is happening here? I would just feel on edge. And when I noticed that, it's I would try to intentionally take a night off and like feel super restless and, irritable. And that bothered me because I could see, the changes that it was having on me and how used to it I had become, how dependent on it I had become. But through all this, I didn't consider myself an alcoholic. And I did obviously, not obviously, I think, many people who find themselves in that situation will do the Google, what is the list of questions. But I didn't really relate to that label. I didn't want that label because I was really high functioning. I was still doing all my things in my life. And I think that the fact that I didn't relate to the label of alcoholic made it harder for me to even like consider that maybe I should make an attempt to stop. I just thought my drinking wasn't like that bad compared to what I thought was like a real alcoholic. If I think about my consequences, I never like crashed a car or woke up in bed with a stranger or got fired. And I say this with so much compassion for those of us who have, because I understand that it's there for the grace of God. But that didn't happen to me. Instead, I had kind of like the other problem, which was that I loved it. And I was considered a fun person to drink with. My tendency was just to I would get really chatty, even chattier and affectionate. And, I was like a typical party girl. And I think I really loved that side of my personality. And I was really attached to that part of my identity. So like when I was drinking, I was really like outgoing and flirty. I didn't ever get obnoxious or rude. If anything, I was just like, my one Achilles heel was like, I could be a really big oversharer in that stage, just no boundaries and no filter. And so sometimes like I would wake up really full of anxiety the next day or shame because I'd be like, oh God, what did I say? And to whom did I say it? And, I would say to my friends, like, I'm so embarrassed at, like on one occasion, I do not remember the cab ride home. And they were like, oh God, you were talking up a storm to the cab driver. And I'm like, was I awful? And they're like, no, you were charming. And to which my answer was always like, okay, thank God for auto charm, because I was not there. I don't know who was being charming, but I was really not there. So, but you know what, like even for lively, charming drunks, like people like me, there's a limit to the charm, right? Like I knew even at the time, and of course my friends who are also drinking are not going to notice this as much, but sober people would have. It's like, yeah, I would get like loud and repetitive and, just not listening, or, I would lose all my ability to speak articulately. And what used to bother me the most, like I said earlier, was like, I know that I would tend to be overly open with people who really hadn't earned that place in my life. And looking back on that would really upset me. And just wasting hours and hours on situations and like, let's go on to the next thing. It's like, then you wake up and like, there was no value in those hours. Like nobody was being clever or entertaining or fun. And then just the hangovers and the shame were just brutal.
Yeah.
So I think that as for like when I started really accepting or understanding that it was, when it really started bothering me, it was like well before my 40th birthday. By this time, I'd probably been drinking fairly heavily for over 10 years. Yeah. And at that stage, I was like noticing myself. So I would notice that, you are really aware of how much wine is in the bottle and how much everybody got in their glass, and whether you're drinking faster than others, and whether someone has got more than you, and how much is left in the house, and do we have more, and if we don't have more, do I have any at home for when I get home? This is embarrassing for me to admit, because it's something I'm embarrassed by, but honestly, I had all those thoughts. And I was living in Canada at the time, in Vancouver. And in Canada, it's really not that easy to buy alcohol. It's not like it is here in the United States. I live in Los Angeles now, where you can get anything anywhere. But you have to go to like a government liquor store or a private wine shop, which usually has, and they're few and far between, and their hours are not that approachable. So I was always like aware of like, what's my route home? Am I going to be passing a liquor store? Could I stop in and get a bottle of wine? Is it too late? Like all those things. So, even though everybody around me was telling me, you're fine, I really did not feel fine. I was increasingly just feeling like I am out of control with this. And it was distressing to me. It was just distressing. I think that I felt it. I started noticing that I was getting increasingly anxious around anytime there was alcohol in a public setting, because of course I was going to take part, like at a work event or something. And I remember one time when a colleague of mine, we were all out on some group thing and everybody was drinking, and my colleague said to me, it was just like a well-meaning joke, but like, oh, we really had to pour you into a cab at the end of the evening. And I just felt so ashamed. I think back in London, my London days, in my early 20s, that kind of comment wouldn't have bothered me because like, basically that was normal for everyone. And also I was younger. But by this stage, I'm pushing 40, I'm a professional woman, I'm in a high profile role at a newspaper in my city, and I had some visibility, and I did not want to be known for being drunk.
Yeah.
Just not something that I felt like I wanted to be about, and how I wanted to operate in the world and be. So I really started dreading those public work events, because for me, so whether it was like a work party or like I was often invited to galas or opening nights of things. I was the arts editor at the newspaper there. And I would just get so anxious because not having a drink wasn't an option, or, not usually. So I would have some, and then I would just be so anxious about, am I managing my consumption in a way that appears, acceptable? And then, could anyone tell if I was tipsy? And I would just be so ashamed. So that was the stage when I tried really hard to moderate. And as I know you've talked about a lot, it's like moderating is just so stressful. It's so stressful. And for me, it just didn't work. I broke so many promises to myself. Even if I would manage to like get out of the event still relatively together, then there was almost like a backlash. Get home and have like 3 glasses of wine before you go to sleep. It's crazy. But I think that for me, part of the problem that made it really hard to push away from it was like, I wasn't a train wreck when I was drinking. Like what I really I liked it. And I know that it's, maybe it's a little controversial to talk about that side of it, but I loved it. There were times when I loved it. I was not a person who drank to drown my sorrows. I really drank to kind of like get high. And I would get super high energy, vivacious, and just have all this euphoria in my brain. And so it wasn't punishing when I was going through it. And, while I was drinking, I felt really like larger than life, but I was drinking way more than I intended, more often than I intended. And, I would just like wake up with a crashing hangover and then promise myself that night I wouldn't drink. Or maybe I'll just have 1 glass, but then that glass would make me want another one. And, before I know it, I'm like falling into bed with my makeup on again. I came across an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that really rings in my ears, and that became kind of like sort of like a mantra that just played in my mind again and again and again, which was, first you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes you.
I love that quote in a terrifying way.
I know, right? And it really helped me to see that like, it is that first drink that's where I, would go wrong. So anyway, I think, so what happened next, I started to I think I was maybe even unconsciously pulling back from things like those public events because they gave me so much anxiety, and just choosing to spend time with people around whom I could drink the way I wanted. And they were all like wonderful people and they're still my friends, but I'm not saying I was like running with a bad crowd or anything. It's just that my world got smaller and I was hemming myself in because I was ashamed of the way I was showing up in the world. And I have to just call myself out a little bit here too, because if this sounds like a high bottom problem, it's like, oh, it was just a lifestyle choice and it wasn't entirely positive, and then I just stopped. It's like, no, does not tell the whole story. I mean, just because I didn't, the seriousness of my problem didn't manifest in huge cataclysmic like life consequences, but it was really serious for me. And of course, there were still plenty of like risky moments. I took risks. I embarrassed myself. There were, times when, when I was just frankly wild and did and said things that I wouldn't have sober and I wouldn't today. And I think the main thing was just how out of control with it I was. I knew that I wanted to stop. Even though I loved it, I wanted to stop and I couldn't. And that really frightened me.
Yeah.
And that went on for years, like after that point. In fact, I think my very first time when I thought like, oh, I'm going to make an effort. I had been complaining about it to my friends for years, but I'm going to really make an effort. I woke up one Saturday morning in my bedroom in Vancouver and I was just way too hungover to do anything except scroll Facebook, probably like with one eye closed. And Annie, I came across, a Facebook ad for your course. Yay. And I was like, I'm doing it. So I signed up for it and I did the video course, and I didn't do it like perfectly. I spaced it out over like 2 months or something. But I really loved your message. I really loved that this wasn't about, are you an alcoholic or aren't you? That it was about my own relationship to myself and how alcohol was getting in the way of that or holding me back from living the life that I wanted to live. And that was really, I think, the first time that anyone had suggested to me that like, you don't have to be like, I don't know, like living under a bridge in order, to need to stop drinking. And so reframing this as alcohol use disorder. And I didn't have to wait for my life to be completely destroyed before making a change. It was just super eye-opening. And it helped me to see that what I was doing and how I was living, I was in conflict with myself. I wasn't in alignment with my own values. I mean, like I have since left the newspaper. Now I'm a publisher of self-help books, so healing and growth and personal change, recovery, all, making the most of your time on earth. These are super, super core values for me. And I know that the way that I was drinking wasn't allowing me to, it wasn't in alignment with the impression that I wanted to make on other people and how I wanted to show up in the world. So I did your course for over the course of a couple months where I was still sort of drinking along the way. And it actually took another, like that was in 2017. So it took another like 3 years before I stopped for good. That is how deep it had its tentacles into me. I wanted to, I was making efforts, and it still took years.
And it's so good for people to know and hear that. I think people get so caught up in like, it has to be kind of one and done, but really just the door has to open. And then the only way you can fail it is if you stop or if you give up. And it might take time, and that's okay, because I think that we have to sort of, this is a poor choice of words for this, but we have to almost bottom out the possibilities, right? Like we have to almost try it enough times to really understand for ourselves that there's nothing left here for us. It's called like an extinction process, where over time you try it enough times that you're like, no, there really is nothing left here for me. And then like there's so much freedom on the other side of that process, right?
Yeah, what I think that so for me, that kind of the gradual nature of my quitting was important, partly because yes, I was sort of titrating off the alcohol and or experiencing like diminishing returns and really getting aware of those diminishing returns. But I was also building my muscle for like getting accustomed to what it felt like to spend my evening sober. And that took some time to get used to, to really, to really feel like acclimated to that. Because at first it was just so jarring. I had been, inebriated most nights for years and years and years. And it was weird. It felt like kind of cold and life was just too sharp and too real at first. But I did some good things for myself in this experimentation process. I started I did all kinds of stuff. I downloaded the Daybreak app. I was on there all the time interacting with other people who were on their day 1, day 2. I found it really hard to get past day 3. For me, day 4 was like my falling off day always. But I kept on trying. I would listen to Andrew Johnson's Stop Drinking meditation app like every night. I read Holly Whitaker's blog. Like I was on the podcast, and I even went to an AA meeting at that time, although it was not a good fit for me in terms of the group, and it freaked me out so much that I went home and drank a bottle of wine in 45 minutes. Like it was really, yeah, that's but anyway, after like a few months of this and a couple months after doing your course, I decided to really give it a serious go and try to just like have a big sober stint. And this actually happened to be, so my first night was a Friday night. And it was also the week that Russell Brand's book Recovery had just come out. And I had I pre-ordered it on Amazon in hardcover, which is a huge commitment for me. And I took it with me to the Korean spa where I knew there was no alcohol. And I went in the steam, and I lay on the warm jade floor and I read the book and I just felt all my feelings. And I cried, and it was just so magical. It was hard. It was painful. But I also felt just this overwhelming sense of relief that I was finally giving this to myself that I had been crying out for such a long time. So that was my first the beginning of my first sober stint, and it only lasted 30 days. I was like, pink clouds, life is so great. And why didn't I do this sooner? And what, this almost feels easy. And then of course, like you've heard this story so many times, after like a month of that, I was like, well, that was easy and I loved it. So surely I can just have a glass of wine now, because it'll be so easy to just give it up again. Like, okay, didn't work, right? It was terrible. I just, I spiraled right back down again. And then not too long after, like the following year, I got divorced, and it was a really tough divorce. So then I was like, okay, quitting drinking can go right out the window. I just went right down into all of my old comforts. But I was more conscious this time. I knew what I was doing to my brain, my liver, my skin, my heart. And I realized that I was killing my own dreams and, dimming my light. And I feel like, in a way, like that was the scariest part of it. But, and then the final chapter to my story is that the pandemic came along, because all of this is not that long ago, right? The pandemic came along, forced us all into isolation. And at first it was like, yay, everybody's doing the quarantinis and it's so normal and it's fine. And so I was probably drinking more at the very beginning of lockdown. But then lockdown actually became really kind of a blessing. So during my divorce, going through therapy and things, I had I had really leaned into my self-care practices in a big way just to get through the trauma of the divorce. So I was doing, daily walks and healthy food and journaling and meditation. And now with the lockdown happening, there were no dinner parties or restaurants to go to, and I was just like, wow, I am totally free to indulge in my self-care and mindfulness in a really big way. So that was when I really threw the kitchen sink at my recovery, and I read every recovery memoir I could find. I made Russell Brand my spirit animal to get me through Trader Joe's. I would imagine that, when I was pushing my cart through the past the wine and the cider and the tequila and whatever else, that he was just like right there with me. And I'd be like, okay, let's get to the checkout without that. So in the end, it was intention and journaling and meditation and just like self-love and self-validation that got me where I needed to go. So I started giving myself gifts. Like I was like, I'm giving myself a gift, and I'm not talking about like retail therapy or buying stuff. I mean like the gift of, I read The Sober Lush, which was just like for anybody who's like a super sensory person who really, or a sensual kind of a human. I really recommend it because that was one of the things, I love indulgence. And so I would give myself the gifts of like a beautiful cheese board just for me, and the typical kind of baths and things, but also like the gift of like waking up to a clean kitchen, or the gift of like, oh, I'm doing my skincare routine. So just doing things for me. And that was what got me through. So I was still kind of like having the odd drink through 2020. Even with all of that, I was still building my muscle, getting used to really, really getting attached to those feelings of those sober evenings. And they were so rich and so full. And so I had my last drink on December 8th, 2020, which was now, from this vantage point, it was almost 9 months ago. And, that's not a long time, but I know that I've left it behind me. And I just feel every single day that passes, it's further and further in the rearview mirror. So since my last drink, I went through a sober Christmas, New Year's, a trip to Hawaii, Annie, my 50th birthday, a trip to London, to where my daughter still lives, back home to Vancouver, and I managed to, all of those situations would have been super triggering and would have made me very much want to drink in the past. And I did not miss it. So here I am, 9 months, almost 9 months.
Congratulations. It's so amazing. Oh, it's so good. I feel like when you kind of know, and so time, it's sort of irrelevant after that moment. I think we just have to sometimes try it over and over and over. We have to, extinction.
Right.
And sometimes right before extinction, there's like a burst, of activity or trying it or even drinking more. And so often we don't give ourselves kind of the grace in that, and
I'm wanting to test it to see if the hold is still really there. I think that's what, or I remember like the first few times when I tried to give up, I felt like, because I knew I was about to, I suddenly wanted to drink like all the drinks in the world. Like I could, just to try to get, which is just unnecessary, by the way.
Yeah, but you just need to go through those things to make it truly your own, because if it's not your own decision, it's never gonna, it's so much better to be on that side of a longer process than it is to be sober, but mentally have alcohol still take up a lot of it.
Yeah, totally. Just be in its grip. And that is what is so liberating, is like, I do not feel like it has me in its grip anymore. And this is actually, glad you brought that up, because this is why I don't identify as an alcoholic, and why AA didn't really work for me. The message of AA, the very, is one of powerlessness, right? We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. And again, I don't mean any disrespect for anyone who has found value and powerful, who has gotten clean through AA. That's awesome. I know it's helped a lot of people, but what I I didn't like the powerlessness. And it's not about arrogance. It's about blossoming. So I know that I become powerless after I have that first drink, and then the drink takes a drink.
Yeah.
But I am not powerless in my life. I'm absolutely not powerless in my life. And knowing that and doubling down on, doing things intentionally that make me feel good, turning away from what depletes me and turning toward what fuels me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what has made it stick, because that is just a, self-fulfilling, virtuous cycle.
And at the core of all of that is just the one key principle of trusting yourself the most, of allowing your voice to be the loudest in your own life. And I think that's another thing, that if we are quitting because we should, or quitting based on willpower or because of fear, it isn't a moving toward decision, right? It's a moving away from decision. And there's value in that. Like, people change from moving away from pain, or they change because they're moving towards pleasure. But when you allow the process to happen and you allow it to take as much time as it needs, and you come to a place of like, no, I'm just listening to me the most, right?
Yeah.
More than anyone else.
And what I truly wanted had shifted. And once I was able to fully acknowledge and embrace what was most rewarding for me, then it was effortless. I think that if I had tried to quit from a place of deprivation, there's just so much self-flagellation in every slip. And I just didn't do that to myself. I mean, I didn't beat up on myself a lot, maybe a little, but it was because I was so interested in healing myself and supporting my most important values and goals that became a firm foundation that I could stand on. And so I love what's happening in like the conversation around sobriety now. I really love this, because it's not only is it more joyful, but it's more effective.
Yeah, it is more effective. And I think because it becomes a really firm internal decision. And I think the thing where we get confused is we hear desires inside of ourselves, but they're not fueled by our truest self. So they're like false desires, because they're fueled by the dopamine hit, or by the quick fix, or by numbing. And then if you let that play out with, like, I just say it over and over, curiosity without judgment, you slowly narrow into, oh wait, like, I don't actually want that. Like, yeah, it feels good in the moment, but then it has all this other stuff. So the net gain is actually negative. So
yeah, exactly. And like, even now, I don't feel tempted to drink, but I still it's just muscle memory right now. It's just being accustomed for all those years to that bitter, sour, or the heat of alcohol, just the flavor of it, or the ritual of it. So that if there's ever been a moment when I was tempted to slip in the last 9 months, and there have been, like, honestly, I count them on one hand, and it was always about giving myself that sensory experience or the ritual experience. But then I would ask myself, do you want to be inebriated right now? And the answer was always no, I really, really do not. I don't miss that. So one thing I do now, and I know not everybody finds this beneficial, but I've become like a massive, like, crafter of non-alcoholic cocktails, because I still love it. At the end of the day, like, I work really hard all day, and at the end of the day, I put on the news and I'm cooking dinner, and I would love to have a fiery, bitter, grown-up drink that is not the kind of drink that I have during the day. And so I make there are so many awesome alcohol-free spirits out there. Tonic water is my jam, like bitters, and whatever it is to just kind of like give that astringent kind of hit on the tongue. And that's it. I don't actually want to be inebriated. I just want that experience, that ritual, that kind of pleasurable giving to myself in a way that doesn't rob anything from me. So yeah, that's been a big part of it, is just recognizing, oh, this is just muscle memory. This is just ritual and a sensory experience that I'm craving. I don't want to be inebriated, and I really don't want to go back into that roller coaster.
Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday a box showed up here because people send me non-alcoholic drinks from time to time, and it was Curious Elixirs. And
Hmm.
I tried it. Anyway, if you haven't tried them, they were really good.
I
Very
have. I have. I think I've probably tried them all, and there are
nice.
several in the UK only that are really good and very, they have like the botanicals
Yeah.
and yeah. Personally, I'm a big fan of that. I think that yeah, it scratches the actual itch for me, and the actual itch in those moments is just it's about flavor and ritual. It's not about the alcohol, the poison inside of it. I just don't need it.
Yeah. And I'm so impressed because you look at the ingredients and they're still like organic, very little sugar, no added sugar,
Low
15 calories
calorie.
a
Yeah,
bottle. Like, but they
exactly.
taste like they have all these, I guess they're called speed bumps, so that it's a sipping drink, not a like
Right.
orange juice would be like a chugging drink, or like when I first stopped drinking, I would order Shirley Temples with my kids. And, I mean, it's just pure sugar.
Yeah, I just don't want all that sugar. And then also, yeah, for me it's about like having something. So some good substitutes include ginger, and I don't
Mm.
even mean like ginger beer or ginger ale. I mean like fresh ginger, so, which and also actually jalapeno, so something with a little bit of heat in it. My girlfriend and I, um we have a a cocktail shaker, and we'll make
Yeah.
like beautiful kind of frothy cocktails with, and yeah, it's a sipping experience, and that's something really sensorially pleasurable.
Oh, that's so awesome. That's so great. A few other things that you said that I thought just worth commenting on is when you were talking about, being so aware of the alcohol. It's interesting hearing so many stories because they always bring me back to points in my own journey. And I remember that too. I literally remember, calculating like, okay, there's 4 of us and we only ordered 1 bottle.
Yeah.
And now that's like, is everybody else going to want another bottle? Can I order another bottle? Are we not ordering another bottle? Like, it was just such a, like,
Yeah.
I was not in the conversation with the 4 people. I was literally calculating how, how was it going to work? How was it
Yeah,
going to
and
right?
again, that feeling of deprivation, almost like, am I going to get enough of what I need? And I know that this is, I mean, whatever we have, I'm going to want more. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's, oh my God, it's just so nice. It's so nice not to have that as being part of any social experience anymore. Not only that, but I love knowing that I can drive myself to any
Mhm.
kind of party or event and safely drive home. And I know that, I mean, I love, I love being able to have an intelligent, witty, articulate conversation until late at night.
Yes.
It's just, that is amazing. So yeah, I don't know. I know that a lot of people who listen to your podcast are trying to figure out whether they can stop drinking and whether they should stop drinking. And I just want to encourage them to join the club, because there are just a ton of cool, sober people out there. Um, and they're creative and dynamic and beautiful and healthy. And I think that, when it was hard for me to stop drinking because it was fun, like I said, and maybe some other people out there can relate to it. Um, but what I have now is a more nuanced, richer experience of fun. So I used to think that I was drinking to crank up my vitality and really feel alive. And what I now know is that actually it was a form of dissociation, and
Yep.
that I wasn't actually I didn't have extra vitality. What I had was an artificial, exaggerated sense of energy, that, I was thinking about this the other day, like what to correlate it to. And it's almost like the difference between like a syrupy fake strawberry flavor, a chemical fake strawberry flavor, versus the subtler, but more pleasurable experience of a real strawberry, which
Yeah.
is kind of a little bit
Love
different each
that.
time you eat one, right? And I just, drinking became like, yes, it was fun, but it was exactly the same experience every single time, and I have had enough of it. And now I just want the real strawberry,
Yeah.
and I just want to experience, okay, who am I and who can I be? What is the version of myself that is free from this substance for the rest of my life?
I love that so much. I love the strawberry analogy. It's such a good one. And I what you said about drinking just feeling the same every time, like it really did. It felt the same to be drunk at, a party as it did to be drunk at home on the couch, as it did to be drunk at a barbecue. Like it was all so similar and so the same.
Yeah.
One of the
And I
other
think that the pandemic and the isolation of that really hit that home for me. It's like, okay, I can either, it's either wine with friends or wine with Netflix, but ultimately it's still wine and it ends the same way,
yeah.
and it feels the same way because it takes you out of your authentic moment and puts you in a chemical state.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. One of the things that you said that I thought was also really an interesting moment in your story is, when you read the Russell Brand book and you're at the spa and just having that moment of almost grieving. And I think that that's so important for us to like experience and honor, like just realizing, like, instead of making ourselves wrong and our past wrong and alcohol wrong even. And, one of the things that I talk so much about is that I believe that people should create, instead of behavior-based goals. So like, I want to be sober or I never want to drink again. Fine. Those are fine. But I think a far more useful goal is how you want to feel around alcohol, because that allows you to go through the whole process of testing and knowing, is this actually getting me to where I want to go? And by the way, it allows multiple options. So like when I said, I want to feel like alcohol is small and irrelevant, that's what I want. It allowed for the option that I might drink on occasion, and it allowed for the option that I might never drink again. And by making peace with both those options, allowing myself to mourn whatever it was and moving forward towards that feeling, I was never in a place where my brain was telling me it was wrong to drink, because it was all just a testing process to get to where alcohol was small and irrelevant. And through that process, like, freedom was really there, because my goal, like, I couldn't mess up that goal. But if you say my goal is being sober, then by definition, every time you drink, you're messing up the goal. But all those drinks were actually the path to the freedom, right?
Yeah, and I love what you're saying about, just testing it, and I think, yeah, that's exactly right. If you're truly, so for me, my goal was to be, and I don't know if I articulated it quite like this, but I know that what I was trying to do was just to be awake and aware to my feelings. So it was just mindfulness. It was like, how is this really for me? Is this giving me energy, or is this taking energy away from me? And so that's why I kind of allowed myself, I think, to go in and out of it for as long as I did, because there were some evenings when I would, have a slip, and I would be like, okay, there was nothing bad about that entire experience. I drank, I laughed, I had fun, I woke up and I felt okay the next day. So no big whoop. But I also knew, and I needed to know that, but I also knew that I had spent 4 hours of my evening doing that. And was that really what I wanted to do with my evening? Were there other things and other experiences I could have? And just knowing that the value of occasionally having like a consequence-free drinking evening was not big enough. That didn't add enough value to make up for the cost of feeling like I was on a runaway train to wrecking my health, So it just wasn't. And ultimately, you know what, it was about my brain health as much as anything else. I mean, a lot of people say, you hear the phrase all the time about like just wanting to switch your brain off at the end of the day. And I understand, and I still want to kind of like disconnect from stress and work at the end of the day. But by chemically switching my brain off, now that I'm, also getting older, more mature, I'm like, that is the last freaking thing in the world I want to do is diminish my mental acuity and capacity. Like my brain is all I've got, to kind of get me through this life and determines the quality of my experience in this body. So the last thing I wanted to do was, handicap myself mentally. And so, yeah, the odd kind of fun enough night, I just determined it's like, this is not worth it.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. Well, Maggie, let me ask you the question that I always close with, which is, if you were going to go back to Maggie and, sort of both the journey and before your journey even started, and really just the regret of wondering what you said or did and relying on auto charm, which I love. That's so funny. What would you tell her about how life is now?
Oh my goodness. Just that first of all, just a ton of compassion for where she is and how she got there and where all of these impulses are stemming from. I just have a lot of compassion for myself around all of that. And the other thing I think would be, I'm not really a person that has regrets. And so I don't even necessarily think that I would say like, do it sooner. But what I would say is that everything in life is a trade-off. Yeah. Everything that we say yes to is a no to something else. And by saying yes to drinking again and again and again and again, I didn't realize how much I was saying no to. And saying no to one thing, which is alcohol, has allowed me to say yes to so much more.
I love that so much. So true. And it's like, it's just so well said. Everything we say yes to is a no to something else. And it's just like, we just have to choose our yeses better. Yeah. And having so much compassion, which is the most important thing. Well, this has just been amazing, Maggie. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Annie, for giving me the opportunity, for all the great work that you're doing in the world. I just know that so many people are helped by your wisdom and by your programs. You're awesome. So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. Hey, I'm so excited because we are literally just about to start another live alcohol experiment. And if you don't know about the alcohol experiment, you need to literally drop everything right now and go to livealcoholexperiment.com. Here's the thing. This is a 30-day challenge, and it's designed to interrupt your patterns and put you back in touch with the best version of you. You'll know it's that version that's living the most joyful life, that version that doesn't need alcohol to relax or have a good time, and that version that's having more fun and is more peaceful than ever. Again, it's just a 30-day challenge. It's live every single day. It's starting on the 1st, so hurry up. Join me at livealcoholexperiment.com. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.